Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The disgusting abuse of Mary, Queen of Scots. One of the most intriguing and captivating women of the Tudor period was Mary Queen of Scots. At just the age of 6 days old, she became the Queen in Scotland, but was later forced to abdicate in favour of her son. Mary's love life was rather tragic, and inside of her marriages she experienced heartache and tragedy. But in her second and third marriages she also experienced abuse and horrific treatment at the hands of men who wished to rule Scotland for themselves and act as king. But she never gave them the power that they wished for. She may have also been forced into marrying her third husband, but she ultimately was forced to flee her native lands and was later executed at the orders of the English Queen, her cousin, Elizabeth I. But what is the story behind the disgusting abuse of Mary, Queen of Scots? As mentioned, 6 days after her birth, she became the Queen of Scotland as her father died, and she was the only legitimate child of James V. She was described as a weak and frail child, and Scotland was ruled by regents until she became of age and an adult to do so. But one of the first shocking events that occurred during her young life was that when she was just 6 months old, the Treaty of Greenwich was signed, which stated that at the age of 10, Mary would be forced to marry Henry VIII's son, Prince Edward, the future Edward VI, and this was the manipulation of Henry VIII that led to this proposal. Henry VIII wanted to bring together England and Scotland, and he wanted to rule over both. The treaty said that Mary would be forced to move to England and live at the royal court where Henry VIII could oversee her upbringing, and Mary would have been ripped from the important bonds that the infant child made such as a young age. She was seen as just a pawn in the games of men who wished to take over Scotland, but this treaty was unpopular, and the War of the Rough Wooing occurred, and Henry VIII carried out a military campaign against the Scots which caused chaos. Edinburgh was burnt heavily, and other settlements were massacred and set on fire. But Mary was moved for her safety, and the English left a trail of devastation. But behind Henry VIII's back, the French king, Henry II, had proposed to unite France and Scotland, and he suggested marrying Mary to his 3-year-old son, the Dauphin Francis. This marriage was agreed, and then at the age of 5, Mary Queen of Scots was ripped away from Scotland and was sent to France to spend the next 13 years inside of the French court. Mary was accompanied at the French court by 4 girls her age, all named Mary, and also her 2 illegitimate half-brothers. On the 4th of April 1558, she signed an agreement giving Scotland and her claim to the English throne to the French if she died without a child, and she married the Dauphin. But her marriage to Francis II would be a short one and would end in tragedy, as he died on the 5th of December 1560, and Mary was completely distraught by this. She went back to Scotland, and the political situation in Scotland was very dangerous, and Mary would spend a large amount of time fearing for her life. John Knox regularly condemned Mary for her religious views and dressing too elaborately, and the powerful Knox was a thorn in her side, and she did try to charge him for treason. Mary was faced with a number of power-hungry men who sought influence for themselves, and through marriage much of her heartbreak and abuse comes. One incident occurred when a French poet who fell in love with Mary, named Pierre de Boscaldi Chestelard, entered her bedroom secretly and hid under her bed. It was claimed he was trying to surprise her and declare his love for the Scottish Queen, but he then later forced his way into her room again when she was about to get changed. Shocked at this, he was later executed and beheaded for his actions. Mary then married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, and they were both grandchildren of Margaret Tudor, and it's believed Mary insisted on the marriage out of love, and the union angered the English Queen. However, the man she married was known for his great arrogance, mean streak and abusive nature. Darnley was not happy with the fact he became the king consort, and he wanted to be co-sovereign ruler of Scotland, being able to call the shots in the country, but Mary refused this, and their marriage became rather strained and difficult. Darnley was vain, and he was very unpopular with other nobles, and was an alcoholic. He regularly drank himself under the table, and when he became drunk he was very violent and at times, allegedly, was violent towards Mary, Queen of Scots. He would hit and beat and assault the Scottish Queen. But Mary also then became pregnant. But while she was with child, Darnley carried out the most brutal and savage attack on one of Mary's closest advisors that would cement himself in history as one of the most evil people in the 16th century. Darnley had David Rizzio stabbed 56 times on the 9th of March 1566, whilst the Queen was watching, and Rizzio and Mary were close friends. Darnley's attack was supposed to force Mary into giving him the power he wanted. The attack was a bloodbath, but Mary did give birth to her successor James. But the marriage continued to struggle, and Darnley remained erratic and violent. But later, Darnley was murdered. Mary herself fell under suspicion for the murder of her husband, and she had to defend herself to Elizabeth I, writing, "I should ill fulfil the office of a faithful cousin or an affectionate friend if I did not tell you what all the world is thinking. Men say that, instead of seizing the murderers, you are looking through your fingers whilst they escape, that you will not seek revenge on those who have done you so much pleasure, as though the deed would never have taken place have not the doer of it been assured of impurity. For myself, I beg you to believe that I would not harbour such a thought." But there was one man who was considered guilty of Darnley's murder, and he was James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell. Whilst Mary was travelling from Linlithgow Palace to Edinburgh, the Earl of Bothwell appeared with 800 men and virtually abducted the Scottish Queen, and he assured her that her life was in danger, and he then took her to Dunbar Castle, Hepburn's castle, for alleged safety. It was here where she was taken prisoner, and then Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, abused her and raped her numerous times in order to secure her hand in marriage. He also had dreams of taking the crown himself, and Mary did submit to him and was forced into marrying him in the great hall of Holyrood Palace. But then 26 Scottish peers turned against Mary and Bothwell and raised an army. Mary did allegedly, whilst she was imprisoned, miscarry twins and was then forced to abdicate days later. Mary fled to England and was then arrested and placed in custody inside of many different English castles. This is because in England, Catholics backed her to overthrow the English Queen Elizabeth I. Over the next 18 years, she was moved into many different castles, and she was kept under rather lavish prison conditions at the time. She was held in the house of Bess of Hardwicke, for example, and she grew close with the wealthy English noblewoman. She was even allowed her own staff, sometimes more than 20 people, to attend on her, and when she moved from house to house, 30 carts transported all of her stuff. She took with her best tapestries and carpets, but there was one thing that money could not buy for Mary, Queen of Scots, and that was her freedom. She grew tired and frustrated and remained a prisoner of the English Queen for 18 years, and she grew so tired she became involved in a number of plots to overthrow Elizabeth and take the English crown for herself. The final nail in the coffin was the Babington plot, which she agreed to be involved in, and this was discovered. Francis Walsingham's spy masters uncovered the plot to assassinate the English Queen, and Mary was then placed on trial for treason. Elizabeth then was hesitant to order Mary's execution, as she was an anointed queen, but was eventually persuaded to do so by the Privy Council, as having Mary alive was too dangerous. On the 8th of February 1587, inside the Great Hall of Fotheringhay Castle, Mary was brought out to her execution, where an axeman took her head off. It took more than one strike to the axe to take her head off. The first blow missed her neck and struck the back of her head, and the second blow severed the neck, but the head was still held on by a small bit of sinew, which the executioner cut through with his axe. As he held her head up to the crowd, the executioner cried, "God save the Queen," and then her head slipped from the wig she had been wearing, and her head hit the ground, which shocked the crowd, and it was said her lips stripped up and down a quarter of an hour after her head was cut off. Mary, Queen of Scots, lived a very tragic life, and she had experienced throughout her life the manipulations of men who wished to take her power and crown. She had been abused by her husbands, and also ultimately suffered at the hands of the English Queen Elizabeth I, her cousin. Her execution inside a Fotheringhay was a brutal and tragic end to the life of a woman who was incredibly interesting and captivating. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.